It's been said by scholars and snipers alike that professionals have standards, so it is abundantly, painfully obvious that Liutprand of Cremona is no professional at all. This weasel of a man is best known for scrawling out his personal grudges and passing off the result as history. Unfortunately for those of us with standards, Liutprand single-handedly destroyed our collective understanding of a century of medieval Roman history, exacting his payback against the city's ruling family by scribbling a slew of salacious rumors that later earned that era the title of pornocracy. The man generated an episode of Pope fights out of thin air just by lying so much. This guy is no professional historian. He's a gossipy turbo-misogynist and he sucks. He sucks so unbelievably bad. But in today's episode, Liutprand is going to get what he deserves. So, not a moment too soon, let's do some history. As a chronicler of big events in the 900s, Liutprand had one essential advantage of being right there for a ton of it. Growing up in the great city of Pavia, where the kings of Italy had reigned for the last 4 centuries, he landed himself the role of secretary to the most powerful man in the peninsula. That should theoretically be the king, a guy named Hugh, but he was ousted by nobles and exiled to France in 945, so the real power lay with the upstart Prince Berengar II, and that was Liutprand's guy. Well, briefly. After getting that secretary job in 947, Liutprand traveled on diplomacy as far as Constantinople, but once Berengar became official king of Italy in 950, something soured between the two men. Liutprand never quite explained why, but given his habit of hating and being hated, it's not a shock. So, in 955, Liutprand skedaddled north to saddle up with King Otto of Germany. But in Liutprand's eyes, king alone would not suffice for his new best pal Otto, especially when that scoundrel Berengar was still out there doing whatever it was he did that bothered Liutprand so much. For the time being, Liutprand sated his thirst for revenge by scribbling his gossip book, the Antapodosis, literally retribution, but real life gave him what he wanted soon enough. In 961, Otto campaigned into Italy, deposing Berengar and pressing on to Rome, where the Pope crowned Otto as Emperor of the Romans. Now imagine Liutprand's vindictive glee at seeing his former boss vanquished and his new boss promoted to biggest man in Europe. Meanwhile, Otto installed Lutski as Bishop of Cremona, using him as a papal point man to help elect new popes favorable to Otto. When it came to Italy, Liutprand was Otto's guy, so beloved by the emperor that another bishop offered Liutprand the body of a saint in exchange for just putting in a good word. I wish I was joking. Saint Himerius of Cremona used to be Saint Himerius of Aemilia until that city's very own bishop gave the okay to a heist. Himerius was stealthily yoinked from his resting place in the middle of the night and carted north to Cremona, where Liutprand claimed perhaps the last major win of his career, because his next job from Otto was to head for Constantinople. See, in 967, Otto had gotten into a tiff with the Byzantines by muscling in on their territories and vassals in southern Italy, making the critical mistake of starting a fight they had no capacity to actually win. In the hopes of smoothing this over and coming to an amicable resolution, Otto sent old Loose Caboose out east to conduct a marriage alliance between the Greek imperial princess and the young Otto II. Now, last time Liutprand was in Constantinople, it went great. He dined with the emperor, watched games in the Hippodrome, and witnessed an array of mechanical marvels like singing golden birds. However, this time he was not a friendly ambassador, but an envoy from an antagonist who stole their vassals, invaded their territory, and now had the barbarous gall to ask for the hand of their beloved princess too, with the Byzantine territories of southern Italy as her dowry. Not a chance, bozo. The Emperor Nicephorum had zero intention of entertaining Liutprand's absurd request and every intention of screwing with him. Liutprand recounts his experience abroad in a lengthy letter to Otto, so we should immediately be suspicious of every detail presented, as he never misses the chance to contrast the big bad Byzantines against the sublime hotness of his boss he is actively flattering. So, Liutprand arrived at the great imperial city in June of 968. Forced to wait outside the gates in the rain and then confined to a leaky shack on the complete opposite end of the city, kept under a guard that stopped him from leaving unless summoned by the emperor. Beaten frequently and given rancid wine to drink, he was fiercely ill for much of the next 4 months he spent confined in the city. When he was summoned to the palace, he got exactly nowhere in his negotiations, as he describes repeatedly falling into squabbles and bickering about whose fault the war is, whose religion is full of heresies, and who can even call themselves emperor. One especially spicy barb among many exchanged over the months is when Nicephorum mocked that you are not Romans, but Lombards. Absolutely brutal. Freaking got him, dude. There really is an astonishing amount of name-calling described in these pages. Even assuming the account is heavily biased in his own favor, Liutprand comes across as severely bad at his job, both in dealing with the Byzantine emperor and in reporting back to Otto. He describes the emperor with an array of vile features and character flaws, says he drinks bathwater, and then turns around to fawn over how Otto was virtuous and shapely before, but now in comparison he's even hotter than ever. This drivel is so immature and obviously made up that it genuinely feels like an insult to Otto's intelligence. But also, come on, Otto, this was your guy? This was your #1 diplomat? Maybe you were an idiot. All the same, the months rolled on, and Liutprand found no end of torments. Sensing that his mission was going nowhere, he requested leave and was constantly assured that he could take the next ship out, yet inevitably some new, obviously made-up excuse kept him in shack purgatory. And so it continued through September, 4 months from his drenched arrival, when he was finally permitted to leave for real, but was forbidden from taking the purple garments he had purchased, as non-Greeks were forbidden from wearing that quintessentially imperial color. Now this one really stung, because last time round, when everyone was chill, he was allowed to take his purple stuff back home, but this time the Byzantines were being gleefully mean about this. In his single moment of genuine sympathy, Liutprand even protested outright, "Are you not weary of insulting me?" But the answer was fully no. In their current diplomacy, the mere presence of this envoy from a warmongering, daughter-demanding pretend emperor was an insult, and the Byzantines would not let it go unavenged. Their last abuse was to refuse him a horse for his luggage, so he had to sell off whatever wasn't confiscated before finally leaving for Italy with nothing but the distinctly unpurple clothes on his back and the worst grudge imaginable. After returning home at last in 969, nice, little is known about the last years of his life. He likely died in 973 when we get record of a new bishop in Cremona taking over for the presumably dead Liutprand, but Otto II's marriage was eventually sorted as the new Byzantine emperor offered his niece as a bride in 972, and they did ultimately make peace in southern Italy. Now, the funniest part to me personally is that Liutprand must have thought he had something, that the war gave him some kind of leverage for making a truce. But instead, he arrives and the Byzantines tell him, "How dare you come into our city and demand anything from us? You child, you idiot baby, putting tinsel on your king's head and calling him emperor? Man, get the hell out of here, except actually don't. You stay in loser jail for 4 months. It's truly hilarious watching the Byzantines deal with someone they do not respect at all. But that might be the problem, because clearly I also don't respect him at all, and if I get too incensed by all this, I come off looking like the same kind of idiot as Liutprand. I've got an agenda, a huge agenda, signposted right at the top by my disdain for his writing. The man uses the word harlot more than the word woman, and often can't bear to mention the papal matriarchs Theodora and Marozia by name without reiterating his vitriolic sexism. That's just one angle by which he eagerly commits to every bias against anyone whom he feels has wronged him. Liutprand is a pathologically aggrieved man, and thus a deeply undisciplined historian, planting biases about medieval Rome and Constantinople that to this day have not been undone. I have several valid reasons for disliking him and his work, but I would be stooping to my own Antapodosis if I suggested that was the whole story. If we zoom out to assess Liutprand's writing in the context of who he was, he's an eyewitness to history from the very halls of power that defined the era. Clearly, it made objectivity impossible for him, but with even a little untangling, that's a valuable perspective. And when he's not writing about someone who personally wronged him, his work is well in line with medieval standards. He even has some genuinely neat poetic flourishes. So that's where I'm stuck. Liutprand of Cremona has burned my crops, spat on my laptop, and ruined my life, but the worst thing he's done to me is put me in a position where I have to defend him. How fucking dare he? This man singularly embodies some of the worst traits a historian can have, and in a period with so few other sources, his ink poisons the well for an entire era of medieval history. Yet, he is a source. A rather detailed source, and if we put in the hefty effort to read between the lines of his searing rage, he can be a rather informative source, both for Italy through the eyes of a local and the Byzantines through the eyes of a foreigner. That is useful, and insofar as he is that, we are better off having him than not. Of course, he could have been so much better at his job by simply choosing not to be an asshole, but he didn't, and thus he ruins our lives because we can't just discard him. If we're reading the 900s, we've gotta read Liutprand. So I, as a historian, as a professional with standards, am glad that just this once in the year 968, Liutprand of Cremona got what he deserved. Thank you for watching. On paper, this was exactly a History Makers kind of video, where I go into the backstory and works of a significant historian. But, as I've demonstrated, I don't respect Liutprand nearly enough for that honor, so into the hijinks bin he goes with all the goobers and wackos. As always, more history is on the way, so I'll see you in the next video.